management plans. And probably the outstanding issue on the 20 by 20 calculations have been the population issues. My staffer, Gwen Huff, is in the back of the room. She and I worked closely on that. And before I came up, I asked her, we didn't track it directly, but what percent of the suppliers could use Department of Finance population calculations, which means their boundaries match municipal boundaries. Her estimate was 20%. My estimate was 30%. So a large percent of the suppliers have to go back to the census years, use a GPS file to create their boundaries, go into the block level, and for 2010, come up with a persons per connection, and then use that to go forward. This was probably for most of the times where we turned plans based on the 2020 calculations was due to inaccurate or not following the methodology the department had set up. We worry that if the board was to go forward with GPCD calculations in the short period of time, that would be difficult for a number of these agencies to come up with accurate population calculations. We've learned a lot from the 2010 plans. We anticipate going out with revised guidance in 2015 and a lot of workshops to really help these suppliers develop more accurate calculations, but that'll take time and probably more work than is, take more time than is available for these regulations. So wanted to provide that clarification. So.
How, of the 400 or whatever it is, however many plans are in of the 440?
391.
391.
397.
397. Yeah. How, a lot happened last week. You must have missed it. The, how, SaveOurWater.com, right? do they all have this problem, or what percentage? It sounded like there'd be some communities, you said 30% have their lines fitting a municipality, and then, I'm using your number, it's bigger, 70% don't and have to do this treasure hunt of sorts. But they've been working on this since 2010, right? So it's not a blank slate. You're trying to come up with it for compliance purposes with the 20 by 2020. I think what staff is suggesting here is that we're asking for an estimate, not that it has to be perfect.
Right. What we're saying is we saw a number of them who we had a detailed methodology of how to do it, who were supposed to follow it for their 2010 plans, but didn't follow it and had 6 months to develop it and write in their plans, and still came up with very rough or wrong estimates of population. That if the board was to ask them within a month or 2 months to come up with an estimate for 2013, we think it would be difficult for them to develop an accurate answer in that amount of time. And that we really see a need to revise our guidance to make this a simpler, more clear process to get a good answer for them.
Now, you had the recommendation from Chris Brown that that the state actually would be the better choice using production data, and then the state would actually determine the per capita at some level. Do you agree with that, or is that an option that could be considered, particularly if we're working together among state agencies?
I mean, that's one possibility. I think ultimately, though, then you get the agency disputing, you know, sometimes the state's number, and that may create more headaches than is to have them actually develop a number that they would stand by and support. I see the answer as providing more education and training on how to do this technique. It's not that difficult. We just need to get the method out there and give agencies time to implement it. We've learned a lot since 2010 on what agencies can do and how they should calculate it. So,
Why 2015?
that's when the next round of urban water management plans are due.
So then you would have to give the guidance well before they were due.
We are starting to work on it this month. We've finished the review. We're starting to update our guidebook and to move forward.
Do you have a sense of when you'll be done with that guidance?
We're shooting to have the guidebook finished a year from now. If needed, we could prioritize the population methodology and move forward that way. But so, okay.
That's worth
Thank
thinking
you.
about. Thank you very much. All right, that concludes our public comment. Thank you very much for your thoughtful comments, both in writing and in person. Very, very thoughtful and much appreciated. Now, I want to turn to I have a list of questions and issues. I want to turn to my colleagues first for questions for staff or issues you'd like them to look at, or really whatever your thoughts are.
I'll start.
Thanks, Fran.
This may not be, I would prefer that we separate the regs from the resolution. And I don't care which one we do first, but to me, they're quite different.
Why
So,
don't we start with the regs?
you want to start with the regs? Okay. So in the regs, one of the reporting or two reporting activities that were additional to what is there now in terms of production data was to report on recycled water. I'm wondering if, well, anyway, we'll stick with recycled water, and then reporting on, I think it was called, Steve called it enforcement, but it was really enforcement with a little e, not enforcement with a big, or maybe one way or the other. It was broader than enforcement. It's really implementation. And so can we add a couple of columns for people to add that kind of information? It's not regulatory, but it's it would be good to know.
We can certainly add in the recycled water. I guess with the implementation, what I would wonder is, we would get a large volume of information. And we would have to think about, what are we asking for? If we just ask for numbers, as commenters noted, that doesn't tell the whole story. If we're asking then for text, and descriptions, then we're really getting a large volume of information in that would frankly take a lot of time to sort through if we wanted to do anything with it, to aggregate it or to tell a story about it. So that would be my concern with the implementation information. Not that it's impossible, not that we couldn't do it, it's just I'm not sure how easy it would be to do and then what we would do with it.
If I can, Member Spivey-Weber, you had characterized this as something that would be non-regulatory. And in fact, the way that as I heard this described by a couple of the commenters today and in some conversations we've had over here at the executive table, it seems to me a good way to address this. And it would also allow Mr. Gromberg, in terms of thinking this issue through, to be able to evolve and adapt it, would be, instead of putting this in the regulation, including it in the resolution, not as something that would be regulatory or mandatory, but essentially directing your staff to include in the online reporting tool fields to capture voluntary submittals by local agencies of both enforcement actions related to conservation, and as non-regulatory, we could work through that issue over time as we're developing the reporting field. And then also to capture the recycled water substitution that's going on to enhance potable local water supplies. So, and I have language when the time is right that we could put into the resolution to that effect.
Well, the other reporting issue that we've just been discussing and that we've discussed off and on all day is the issue of gallons per capita per day. And I guess I for one, am still, find it. I was around when in the 2009 period for when it was discussed and discussed and discussed and discussed, and it was largely for communication purposes. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds to me like we've got several options for communication. We have some of the technology options that we can encourage. We have gallons per capita per day, which may be better once DWR has put their guidance together. We have, I guess those are the two of the biggest communication issues that we've discussed today. I'm thinking that maybe that belongs in the resolution as well instead of in the reg.
Just if I may, on gallons per capita per day, I think it's a useful measure for the residential customer class.
Uh-huh. Right.
And you've heard that from at least one commenter today. Because there are issues, that there are challenges when you just have a GPCD for an entire service area, depending on what the mix of the customer classes are, and depending if you have, one or more very large industries that's using a significant percentage of water, it becomes really difficult to use it for anything. But for residential, it can be useful.
And you're not persuaded by the fact that only 30% would have the census tract match their service area, even if they subdivide it into residential?
Well, as Peter mentioned, DWR is working on that, and I would think that would be something the state could provide collectively. The state could provide technical assistance on to help people figure it out.
By August 1st?
Probably not by August 1st.
Okay.
Right. So you might want to say, once we've issued guidance, that might be one way to do it, and then we could work with DWR to try and expedite things. That's an idea. Just think.
And the only other reporting issue that was raised, I think only by one person, but by Martha Davis, was this, was it sales data?
Retail sales in
Retail
addition to
sales,
production.
yes.
Right.
And did you look at that? Was that something that you looked at?
We did, and we heard from a number of suppliers and associations about this. Basically, that it's quite difficult for agencies to quickly get that data and provide it. And so, while it's something that would be valuable, because the difference between the sales data and the production data is what's commonly referred to as non-revenue water, which includes leaks as well as meter errors, water used for flushing the system, fire flows, some other categories. It can be difficult to get it quickly, and so what our intention here is to sort of get what we can immediately, and what we think we can get, having talked to a lot of water suppliers immediately, is that production data. But it would be useful to have the sales data, as IEUA and others have remarked.
Just so you know, my intention is for folks to ask questions, toss out their thinking. I'm going to leave it to staff to sort of organize the key issues, and I have my list, and I'll just add mine at the end to any that haven't been raised.
I agree with the issues that Ms. Spivey Weber has already raised, and in addition to that, I'll add one more. What caught my attention were some of the comments made with respect to other measures that agencies have already or will be putting in place, such as the rates and other things. And I'm thinking perhaps in the regulations that are being proposed, the very last item, which is E2, talks about implementing another mandatory conservation measure or measures intended to achieve a comparable reduction. if we were to delete the word conservation, would that be broad enough that it would encompass things such as rates? I mean, as long as these measures result in the comparable reduction in water consumption, does it matter if it's conservation or rates or any other type of measures?
That's a good question. I think, when we sort of get together as staff, we'll look at that and we'll figure it out. I think we do want to be responsive to the concerns that were raised by Irvine Ranch and others about the effectiveness of the allocation-based rate structures and how useful those are and give credit, as you mentioned, for that and really encourage it. So we do want to come up with language that will cover that.
And
Yeah, the trick is to not make it so open-ended that they have to quantify every alternative anybody can come up with, because then it's just not going to be implementable.
And I strongly support Member Moore's suggestion with respect to information regarding enforcement, not for the purpose, as Ms. Ivy Weber said, of that big E, but for measuring the implementation and the results from this effort going forward.
So can I just ask for a little clarity on that last point? The section that you were referencing, Member Dodek, E2, pertains to other water suppliers. So we're not talking about the urban water suppliers now, but all other water suppliers, those with less than 3,000 connections.
Sorry, I meant to apply it to all.
Okay, all right. And then I would just say that under E2, conservation measures would, I think we would consider those to include rate structures as well. Those would be considered to be conservation measures. So then the language that you're asking us to work on is to look at how to provide for those kind of variance type activities that we were talking about earlier across all types of water suppliers.
But I think if you're going to say conservation measures, it's often seen as hardware. And so you might have to say, have some kind of illustrative example that whether it be technology, behavioral technology, or rate structures, that those count, if you will. I don't know. Maybe I'm underestimating what certainly people in this room would understand instantly, but if someone's just reading this and they're not here, I think they need to know.
Yeah, I would say focusing on that higher level, not just run-of-the-mill conservation, but things that are cutting edge that we know have an impact from agencies that we know have a track record. I mean, in some ways, it's sort of if somebody raised the word equivalence, somebody else used variance in a slightly different context. But the idea is, without it creating a giant bureaucracy to evaluate every gram of water conserved, can we carve out some sort of an alternative path for those that we know have gone above and beyond, whether they've already met their 2020 goal, or they've got an allocation-based rate structure, they've got extensive landscape ordinances like Eastern does or something. If there's a way to articulate folks that are in another league.
Right, and to create the threshold really high enough. So that
It has to be high enough to make it
because
worth the time to figure it out.
That's right, to pick on my own water supplier, which I believe is also your water supplier, East Bay Mud. There are a lot of good things they've done, including a water smart pilot, as was mentioned, but they can do more. I would not think that they meet the threshold.
No, 10% voluntary would not meet the threshold. Definitely not. Okay, other thoughts? Didier, you guys can flip for it.
Okay. All right, thank you. Board members Spivey, Weber, and Doda covered a lot of what I was noticing. One of the things not talked about so far, and I think you're already thinking about it, but just drilling down on the definition of what hard surfaces we're talking about, and reckoning with the unintended consequences potentially on responsible pressure washers and others, who use those techniques and are responsible, and to encourage that. Not sure if I would go so far as setting up a whole certification program, though, it's a compelling idea, but this is emergency regulations. But it is worth highlighting how that activity is important. It can be done well. It can help the environment. It can be done wrong, you know. So I thought that was a good discussion. You know, the issue, don't want to dodge it, that, you know, I support this idea of going with the enforcement reporting as a voluntary out of the resolution through the form. It allows a lot more nuances to be communicated, and then we will learn something from it. And we don't want to go too specific on that. But I thought there were a lot of good comments we received on, you know, just the plainness of the language in the regulation. It just says it's punishable by a fine up to 500. We don't go into the, you know, what a typical local agency would do in terms of its progressive enforcement. You know, I don't know how much you want to go into. You know, I won't say so far as you can have 3 warnings and then, you know, $100 fine. I'm not going there, but I'm emphasizing as an example that local agencies should have that kind of flexibility that we would recognize through our system that that's a good faith implementation of the regulation. So just, I don't have specific language to suggest other than we consider maybe looking at other examples we have in regulation, capturing the idea of progressive enforcement. It's worth thinking about because it's very plain and hard-edged the way we have it written. And we've talked about the allocation-based tiered pricing. And, you know, the comment was made, our regulations discourage that. But I didn't hear specifically how it was discouraged, or I couldn't ascertain it necessarily. But to the extent we don't want to discourage it, but like Chair Marcus has said, you know, this is another tool that the locals can use, and it doesn't replace the systems that they have in place that if they're achieving water conservation goals that the governor has laid out. Good, okay, covered that one. I'm open to the deadline extension to a point. You know, this is an emergency regulation. I just want to look at that in terms of, you know, we talk about August 1st versus August 15th. You know, I respect that the local government processes of noticing that sort of thing, but this is an emergency regulation, and I think we need to do it with all haste. So, I mean, all due respect, I don't think I would support a regulation that we couldn't provide a backstop in enforcement. You know, I don't think excluding the State Water Board from enforcement authority is something I could support. I want to acknowledge this idea of financial assessments of local agencies that are who would benefit from an improved rate structure. I'm concerned about in an emergency regulation setting being too specific, but I'm glad to have the discussion about you know, recognizing that there will be impacts related to the drought on revenue based on the successful implementation of conservation in certain areas, and it's just prudent for local agencies to plan for this. Not sure how specific we would want to be today or in this regulatory context, but it's certainly a germane issue.
We did address that in the digest that accompanies the emergency regulation.
Right. So, you know, as far as tools in the toolbox to graduate to a more sustainable system, it's clearly there. Okay. Well, and then, you know, in closing, just the high level of discourse and you know, the brevity and directness of the input, you know, I just can't thank everyone enough. Staff has done an extraordinary job, but I went through all the comments, all 100, and I felt like there was a lot of substantive ideas, and I hope that our process can reflect that it's a real collaborative effort to try to come up with a system where the state is playing its proper role and really emphasizing action at the local level. So with that.
That's a good thing to tee off on. I, too, would like to thank everyone for their the brevity of the comments, but more importantly, the suggestions, specific, you know, 1, 2, and 3, and this is language we recommend that really made it much more easy to go through and kind of put things into a list. So I agree pretty much with what everything's been said. I wanted to just maybe add a few. Pressure washing. So on pressure washing, it just seems to me that we need to provide for some flexibility. But I'd feel more comfortable if we had some language where there was no reasonable alternative, because I don't know that we need to allow it in all instances. So maybe provide some comment on that. And then on gallons per day, and I really do appreciate Board Member Spivey Weber's comments on that. I think you have a lot more experience than I do in this area. But I keep going back to that utility bill and what some other folks had said, that you need to have a way to translate this to the general public. And so I would like to at least get started. I like the idea of maybe starting with residential. And I really appreciate Martha Davis's suggestion about maybe putting together a work group. I think that it would be helpful to have a work group on that issue and a number of other issues. And I don't know if the same work group would be appropriate for all these other issues, but want to also talk about and it seems that where the board is headed here is on effectiveness of these, allocation-based rate structures and providing for flexibility. But I continue to have some angst. I just sort of feel like, even though I agree with what you all are saying and all the big, really important strides that Southern California in particular has made in this area, and I've toured those water districts and agree with what you all are saying. But at the same time, I just feel like where we've got water flowing down gutters, somebody is just watering their lawn too much, maybe those individuals feel that it's okay because they've paid for it. But it gets back to Madeline Glickford's comment, and there's sort of a disconnect that some people have with respect to the drought. So maybe this is an area for the work group to talk through. I just feel in my gut, that's a waste and unreasonable use of water. And that we somehow need to address it, but at the same time not hamper the very good strides that some of the districts have made on the allocation-based rate structures. Let's see here. Aqua, Ms. Tuck made a comment about not wanting anything in the regulation to limit local agency authority, so I think it'd be good to include that in the regulation. And then just have some questions about looking at the list of 49 cities that don't have water shortage contingency plans. Some of them look like they're EJ communities. And so I'm just thinking that, and we have a lot of good comments about the effectiveness of thou shalt not, and it not really making a difference. And so in these EJ communities, maybe really what they need is some assistance to put together a plan that's workable for them. And so anything that we could do, in the resolution language, maybe in conjunction with DWR to get those communities the assistance that they need in order to put together plans in the event that that's something that they would like. That's it. Thanks.
Can I just clarify, Member Diadamo, with respect to the work group, and maybe we can ask Peter to step back up, but my understanding was they're in the process of redoing the guidance right now relative to how to get to a number of items, including gallons per capita per day. And I am wondering if perhaps they have a stakeholder process that we could then participate in versus whether we need a separate stakeholder process ourselves.
Yes.
He stepped out, but that's something we can follow up on and get back to you on.
But I think it's somewhat different. This is a technical issue, gallons per capita per day and getting the population data. That's very technical. Whatever stakeholder group is putting that together, I hope they are extraordinarily technical because it's complicated. Some of this other activity, and Martha mentioned it, Martha Davis mentioned it in her comment about a work group, was more. And it could be done with DWR, and they may have a group already set up. I'm not opposed to, joining in with some other group. But I think there are a number of issues like helping people with their rate designs in the future, particularly the smaller and medium-sized, leakages are going to be a big area that we're going to have to get into. That was one of the reasons for talking about sales data. And so I think there is a need, and I would say that the makeup of such a work group should be those agencies and associations that touch these various kinds of groups. There are municipal agencies that are out there. Some are large and some are quite tiny. There are CPUC agencies that are out there that are all ranges of sizes. There are, certainly Aqua has a fair number of folks in their sphere of influence. And so we should pursue a work group that is not totally focused just on technical.
There was it was a small thing. It was toward the end from our colleagues at Santa Clara, but they pointed out that they didn't think they had the authority to enact the regs, and I wonder if you had any response to that.
Yeah, without knowing the specific authority they're relying upon, I tend to disagree. And I want to draw a distinction because I know we've kicked around the term police power, and that within the law is generally used to refer to kind of general authority to adopt ordinances. That's a type of authority that states, cities, and counties have, but that special districts might not. That's different, however, from the authority to enforce otherwise applicable law that's afforded to all agencies by the Penal Code. And so my read of Section 836.5 of the Penal Code is that agency employees, public employees, and peace officers would have authority to enforce the board's regulations by issuing infractions as authorized, or citations for infractions as authorized in 1058.5. But I wonder if perhaps that might be something that we could clarify through some further coordination with the special agencies, perhaps a letter from the board or something along those lines.
I think there was I like the brevity and the elegance of the proposed regs, but there were a number of, as opposed to many that are just, by the word count. But to the extent we could add more clarity to it and also have a punch list of things to clarify even subsequently if we need to, that would be helpful. That's also that's all.
You're echoing.
Try it again.
Okay, both of me think that there are some things that bear some clarification. And that leads to I don't know why, that leads to the suggestion, maybe the key is to put this on the other side of this. The question about having a slightly delayed but not a extremely delayed start date. It's not as if we would start enforcing on August 1st. We'd be sitting there expecting people to get up and running. So think about, I don't have an answer, but I'm open to sort of having that or some expectation in the language that, there may have people that are ready to go and want to use it August 1st. You don't necessarily want to limit them. So again, it's not as if we're not doing a comprehensive set of regs here. We're doing some bottom line regs and adding some tools to the toolkit in most cases. And the issue of overwatering applies to everybody here. That one's the one that's not limited. One of the key issues, and my colleagues have raised a lot of them, is just, and we've talked about it a bit, is thinking about the viability, the workability of some neatly defined alternative path or equivalence finding. I want to be very clear, I do not want everybody coming in and expecting you to reevaluate all their urban water management plans and say it's all good. That is unreasonable. There needs to be dramatic uptick in what people see and what people do. But I'm not, the inequity is not the issue of not doing mandatory outdoor irrigation, because we're doing it to a certain extent here. It's if you have an anomalous situation where an agency which is doing a lot and has a bunch of tiers to their drought contingency plan that are impressive, or they're doing a bunch of stuff instead, and they happen to have chosen to put their outdoor irrigation in a further away place that comes with other things and could inhibit what they're trying to do, you want to give some sort of an escape hatch, but only for really, really good behavior. I mean, only for agencies that have done a lot already over the decades and that are, would be seen as cutting edge and who are actually talking about or doing, showing that they're getting decreases in outdoor irrigation using other tools.
Right, and we would still be asking them to do more with those tools.
Correct, yeah. So just think about it. That's, I think, the hardest thing to try and figure out in short order. I do like, many of my colleagues have mentioned the key things, and you've already mentioned the recycled water issue, and look at all those places we're putting in the limitation to potable water, because that has been our messaging, that we're using good, clean, potable water that's traveled for many miles and been treated to an incredibly high level, and we're just throwing it down the drain, essentially, or out on the street, which is sort of our bottom line here. The pressure washing, I have a lot of sensitivity to that, and that's not what we were trying to get at. I can see as we crank down, we're going to want to really have people looking at alternatives. We might want to make some showing. We might want to, again, implementation in these becomes important, but the steam cleaning of parking garages so people don't slip and fall on grease, having been one of the many people who's done that, that is a health and safety issue, and so we intend that that's included, but they don't necessarily know. And so just being a little clearer, and that might be the place to go in general, or the suggestion that someone said, really say driveways, sidewalks, and streets. But yeah, so think about that one to help those folks. That wasn't what our intention is. You've taken care of wholesalers and retailers. I think we'll get to them. That's something to be looking at, the appropriate way to do that, and that's a place where I think we do need some kind of a discussion group that starts now, in the event that it's not going to rain. The change that was suggested in a lot of the comments, it wasn't spoken about as much today. It's just making sure that it doesn't apply to agricultural irrigation, saying they can only water twice a day. So it'd be really clear that we're talking about urban water suppliers, and in the case where you have a district that does both, that you're talking about their residential and commercial users. Potable. And the Disney, whatever the Disney example is, where they're doing something else with it, that was kind of a good one, because they're actually capturing it, treating it, and seeing that it's reused. So however you want to.
Okay, well, I mean, we could do something very specific just for what they're doing. I don't know that anyone else does that.
Okay, well then when it's captured, and because they're going above and beyond, so. The fines issue, again, we do need to explain it a little bit more, in this issue of whether they do or don't have authority. It shouldn't be unclear. I know you feel what it says, but we've got to have language that helps people there. I don't know that we can give people authority that they don't already have. So we do need to probably have some kind of some time in which we're going to figure it out, but try and make it as clear as you can today. I like the idea of retail sales. I get the complication of that and the challenge of that, and so I will defer, the perfect again being the enemy of the good, I'll defer it, but put it on the list for figuring out where to go with it. And gallons per person per day, I find it really hard to let go of even doing an estimate for residential users. I understand this issue, and I'd like you to think about it a little bit. I wouldn't mind asking for some estimates, but being really clear that we're just asking for estimates, and we anticipate that this will get better, and that we pledge to work with DWR to try and help get that guidance out fast. That's one of the ones I'm really on the bubble on it. There were a few other points in the written. There was a suggestion in one of the comments that we talk about, we talk about washing your car, but we should add to that other other vehicles or other things like, you know, I don't know how you want to do that. I was calling it trains, planes, and automobiles just because I watch too many movies, but call it some way to expand it so it's not like, oh, I'm washing my truck, therefore I can use as much water as I want and let it run in the street. There's just got to be some language that uses a common sense.
Vehicle?
Vehicle was fine, but I mean,
Motorized
people,
vehicles, perhaps.
what?
Motorized
Could
vehicles,
be a
perhaps.
motorized vehicle. I mean, you don't really want people using hoses to wash all kinds of things, but that might be a place to start. I'm open to excluding January unless there's a reason. Why not? Because we didn't even do the call. On the other hand, it's not like we're now getting monthly data. It's not being used as this report to clarify, but just think about it. The idea about what city facilities ought to do, obviously water running onto the street is covered. I mean, think about whether you want to put something more in the resolution about that. Our signage recommendation would cover some of the situations that Madeline Glickfeld talked about, because where folks are using captured stormwater or recycled water, they should have signage up like Caltrans does in many places, having used a lot of recycled water, and that helps there. The private water company issue that you did in the slide, and there have been concerns about somewhere in the resolution or digest, that should be explained, because people are just going to look at that with a reference to the fact that we're working with the CPUC, or that CPUC is ready to do those quickly. Adding recycled water production. You know, a lot of these are repeats. The issue of whether to limit enforcement from us for now, but reserve the right to bring it back, I'm open to that if that is a big deal. I don't see us as running in to do enforcement everywhere. We're going to give this a chance to work. I feel funny about saying we won't, and I'm still not sure why we would say we won't when we're not necessarily intending to go in, but why not reserve the right to do it later. But think about that and see how you guys feel about it. I have to listen to everything else that came up today. There's more. Those are the main ones I have. You probably have others that are on your list. Other thoughts, because what we're trying to do is give staff some stuff to work with and then come back with a proposal.
The chair knows this, but I think I should tell everyone else. I have a medical appointment that I need to leave for at 3:30. From what I've heard in terms of the conversation and remarks from my colleagues, I feel very comfortable leaving this in your hand. I do want to take a moment, though, and acknowledge staff's work on this, and thank everyone who came today, who provided comments to us in writing. And should the board, which I hope you will, no pressure, adopt these regulations in moving forward, not just, on this regulation, but on many things, especially during this challenging year and perhaps future years. I see this as part of our ongoing collaboration with other state, local, and hopefully our federal colleagues as well. These are all very challenging, very difficult situations, and that we need to work together on, build upon the collaborations and partnerships that have been put in place, and hopefully will continue to strengthen and grow as we work together. So thank you all for all your efforts to date with respect to conservation, with respect to innovation in managing our state's valuable water resources, and I look forward to future partnerships and future successes.
Thank you. Very nicely said. SaveOurWater.com.
SaveOurWater.com.
Thank you, Tam. All right. How much time do you need? You've been thinking about this since last night on some of these, because they came. Well, last night we already had the comments, and many of these were raised in the again, concise yet clear comments. And this is probably the best concise batch of comments on. You probably win the prize so far in the 2 years I've been here. The rest of you may have a longer term, but I'm very impressed.
Okay, so I'm hearing 4:45.
No.
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 45 minutes.
Oh, 45 minutes, that's what I thought. Okay, sorry, until 4, right?
4 o'clock.
Right.
Okay.
4.
Right around,
Yeah,
right around
okay.
4 o'clock.
All right, and the rest of us will go get some coffee and do our other work and ponder the state of the universe and go online to SaveOurWater.com.
And just for everyone in the audience, if you missed the presentation this morning, it is posted.
Oh, great, thank you.
With the regs, and I believe the information that we referred to this morning as well, the 49 plans that we were referring to are non-plans. That list is also posted, as well as updated survey information.
Oh, good.
So that's included as well.
Terrific.
So I have just a brief
Go ahead.
correction. I think
Sure.
I realized I erred when I was talking about allocation-based rate structures, referring to some of the activities under prohibited activities
Yeah, it
for
doesn't-
individuals. And so I just want to make sure Irvine Ranch and Orange County realize that, because I kind of saw when I was talking about it, a little confusion. And so I was just want to indicate that I read through it more closely and I stand corrected. You made some
Yeah,
reference
it's
in
just
your
the
comment.
prohibited activities are still prohibited.
right.
They're prohibited by us. The question is if there's this anomaly
Mm-hmm.
with the level of the drought contingency plan, which we did out of respect for the work people did on their drought contingency, but you could see a situation in which someone's done far more than the average bear at a lower level, and they have very thoughtfully placed it in a certain place. We might be putting them at cross purposes. So
Right,
you might
on
want to-
outdoor irrigation as opposed to watering hardscape, et cetera, which is prohibited regardless.
Yes, right. Questions before you go? Anything else we can do to be of assistance? Good luck with your mission.
Thank you.
We'll
I'll be
look
back at
forward to
4.
seeing you at 4.